$60 billion. A number so vast it can shatter silence, so heavy it can bend the destiny of a nation. In Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped before the cameras and announced that beneath the soil of Kaya, Gawa, and Bolsa lies more than 1,000 tons of gold. The world gasped. The crowd trembled. Could this landlocked nation, long written off as poor, suddenly stand at the center of Africa's wealth? Or was it the beginning of another chapter in the cruel book of the resource curse? Burkina Faso has suffered famine, coups, and decades of extraction where foreign hands dug deep while its own people remained barefoot. Today the question is sharpened like a blade. Will this gold finally feed the hungry child and light the darkened home? Or will it once again enrich banks in Paris, Toronto, and Beijing while the Sahel remains in dust? Stay with us, because this is not just a headline, it is a turning point history may remember. If you believe Africa's untold stories must be heard, subscribe now and walk with us into the heart of this unfolding battle. The morning sun in Ouagadougou burned hotter than usual when the announcement came. Inside the press hall, ministers stood stiff, cameras clicked without pause, and history seemed to inhale. Burkina Faso, the energy minister declared, sits upon a treasure unlike any we have ever known, more than 1,200 tons of pure gold, worth over $60 billion. For a nation whose annual budget had always been measured in scarcity, the words thundered like a storm across the Sahel. Outside in Kaya, a young man leaned against his rusted motorbike, listening to the broadcast through a crackling phone speaker. His eyes widened. 60 billion, he whispered, half in awe, half in disbelief. His friend shook his head slowly. We heard the same in Niger when uranium was found in Arlit. We heard it in Angola when oil spilled along the coast. Tell me, brother, what changed for the poor there? The laughter around them was hollow. They knew too well the taste of promises swallowed by foreign banks. The government tried to reassure them. This gold is not for export contracts signed in Paris, nor for the vaults of Toronto or Beijing, the minister proclaimed. It will serve the farmer in Banfora, the mother in Bobo Dioulasso, the barefoot child in Dori. The hall erupted in applause, yet on the streets, silence pressed heavier than joy. For the people, words had always been plentiful. Bread had not. Still, the figure of 60 billion shimmered like a mirage in the desert. Imagine roads paved where there had been only dust. Schools built where children still studied under trees. Hospitals where mothers no longer watched their infants fade for lack of medicine. In markets across Ouagadougou, vendors spoke of a future where poverty could finally be buried. But elders sitting under neem trees remembered differently. Gold blinds the poor, one said. It glitters for the stranger, but for us it leaves scars. Captain Ibrahim Traoré called his ministers together in a darkened chamber. The report lay on the table, heavy with maps and numbers. He struck the desk with his fist. This is not a blessing if we repeat the mistakes of the past. We must write a new story. Do you hear me? A new story. Heads nodded, voices murmured agreement, but in their eyes flickered the memory of neighbors who had once spoken the same words. Congo with its mountains of cobalt, Angola with its seas of oil, Niger with its uranium that lit Paris while Niamey sat in darkness. Promises had been plenty. Dignity had been scarce. International media wasted no time. The Financial Times hailed Burkina Faso as the new gold frontier of Africa. Reuters reported that mining firms from Canada and Australia were already queuing for licenses. Analysts on Bloomberg spoke of a possible tenfold increase in national GDP if the reserves were managed properly. But what did properly mean? And who had the right to define it? For too long, properly had meant profit for outsiders and poverty for those whose soil bore the burden. In Bolsa, miners who had worked the ground with bare hands for decades sat quietly. One, his palms cracked and calloused, shook his head. We always knew gold was here, he said. But when they dig with machines and carry it across oceans, will my children still walk to school without shoes? His words carried more weight than any statistic. They were the memory of history, carved into flesh and bone. The government spoke boldly of oversight, transparency, sovereignty. Yet even the boldest declarations were shadows against the long wall of colonial memory. Could a small Sahel nation truly guard $60 billion from appetites that had devoured empires? In Ouagadougou's cafes, students debated fiercely. Some dreamed of factories and refineries rising in the red earth, finally breaking the chain of exporting raw wealth. Others feared that powerful men in faraway offices were already drawing up contracts, deciding the nation's fate with pens rather than guns. The gold lay beneath Kaya, Gawa, and Bolsa like a buried sun. It glowed with promise, yet cast a dark shadow from the past. Every African nation that had unearthed such wealth had faced the same question. Would it be harvest or would it be hunger? The soil itself seemed to whisper warnings through the dry wind. Was this discovery truly the dawn of a golden era for Burkina Faso, or the first echo of a curse that had already consumed Congo, Niger, and Angola? When June arrived, the Sahel's dry winds carried more than dust. They carried the sound of defiance. Captain Ibrahim Traoré walked into the National Assembly and announced what no foreign investor had wished to hear. 5 of Burkina Faso's largest gold mines would no longer belong to corporations abroad. They would be nationalized, transferred into the hands of Sopamab, the state-owned mining company. The chamber erupted. Some cheered, fists raised in triumph. Others exchanged glances heavy with apprehension. The air thickened with history. It was not the first bold move. Months earlier, the government had bought back the Bangu mine, once controlled by a Canadian conglomerate. $60 million and $20 million more in royalties had been paid to reclaim the soil. Critics called it reckless, but Traoré's voice cut through. Better to buy our dignity than to sell our souls cheaply. For the poor miner in Bolsa, those words sounded like a long-awaited anthem. For executives in Toronto boardrooms, they sounded like a threat. The international press rushed to frame the moment. The Financial Times spoke of a dangerous precedent. Reuters reported whispers of legal challenges. Bloomberg warned that investor confidence may collapse. Yet on the streets of Ouagadougou, vendors sold mangoes with brighter smiles. For once, a woman said, "Someone speaks as if the gold belongs to us." But the outside world was moving quickly. Flights from Canada, the United Arab Emirates, and Australia landed at the capital's small airport. In hotel lobbies, consultants and lobbyists whispered their rehearsed lines: partnership, development, opportunity. Yet behind the polished words lay the same machinery that had bled Africa dry for centuries. Exploit first, apologize later. At a university debate in Bobo Dioulasso, the arguments grew heated. One student shouted, "He is too radical. Traoré will scare away investors we desperately need." Another stood to reply, voice shaking but eyes aflame. And what did investors give Niger? Uranium for Paris and darkness for Niamey. Do you want the same fate for us? The room erupted, the clash of ideas filling the night air. Beyond the walls of academia, the question echoed in churches, markets, and radio stations. Was this bold captain a savior or a gambler? Could one man resist the tides of Paris, Brussels, Beijing, and Washington? Or would his name join the long list of leaders who had tried and failed to stand against the world's hunger for Africa's wealth? Meanwhile, foreign companies scrambled. An Australian consortium was accused of funneling profits through offshore accounts. A UAE-backed venture was exposed for concealing subcontractors. Their licenses were swiftly suspended. The government's message was blunt: no transparency, no license. For a nation once dismissed as powerless, the words rang like thunder. Yet thunder does not end the storm. Ambassadors arrived with briefcases promising billions in development packages. Lobbyists spoke of partnership. International analysts warned of isolation. But inside the presidency, Traoré gathered his ministers in a smoke-filled room. "They will come with money," he said quietly. "And when money fails, they will come with threats. But this gold is not theirs. Not this time." The stakes climbed higher each day. The hallways of power in Ouagadougou filled with rumors of lawsuits, sanctions, even covert attempts to destabilize the government. The captain's aides whispered the name of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary slain decades earlier for daring to dream of self-reliance. His ghost lingered in every speech, in every clenched fist raised by the young. "He who feeds you controls you. He who minds you owns you." Sankara's words, once warnings, now sounded like a command. One evening, Traoré stood before a roaring crowd in Kaya. Dust swirled around his boots, the red earth glowing under the setting sun. His voice cut like steel. "If we allow others to value our gold, we will buy back poverty with our own sweat. If we allow them to write our contracts, our children will inherit poisoned rivers and exhausted soil. I swear to you, not 1 kilogram will leave this land without bringing value back to Burkina Faso." The crowd roared, fists high, voices shaking the Sahel night. But even as the chants rose, the question lingered unspoken. Could a small, landlocked nation, surrounded by pressures foreign and domestic, truly dictate terms to giants? Or was this surge of hope only the crest of a wave destined to crash? Could Ibrahim Traoré hold the line? Or would the weight of $60 billion crush him beneath the same curse that had broken others before him? Not long after the celebration of nationalization, tragedy struck. In April, a tunnel in Palmer collapsed. burying 17 artisanal miners beneath stone and dust. Mothers wailed, fathers dug with bare hands, but no one returned alive. It was not just a statistic. It was the sound of shovels silenced forever. Standing before the cameras the next day, Captain Ibrahim Traoré's voice was hard. "No ounce of gold is worth 17 lives," he declared. From that day forward, unregulated pits were to be shut down. The nation mourned, yet it also asked, could a decree alone stop desperation in a land where hunger often spoke louder than laws? The costs extended beyond the mines. In Kaya, wells once crystal clear ran reddish, laced with the sharp sting of chemicals. Women lifted buckets to their faces and asked, if water itself becomes poison, how do we feed our children? The Ministry of Environment confirmed the contamination. Traoré signed an emergency order banning cyanide processing near rivers and commissioned a state-funded purification plant. But villagers wondered whether pipes and machines could ever restore what the earth had already lost. The air itself grew heavy. Within just 8 months, the World Health Organization reported a 31% rise in respiratory illness among children living near mining sites. In Gawa's hospitals, mothers sat with coughing infants while doctors shook their heads, lacking inhalers and oxygen machines. The dust is stronger than our medicine, one physician admitted. Traoré's response was blunt. Then we must bring medicine stronger than the dust. Funds were reallocated, ministers took pay cuts, and new shipments of equipment were ordered. But could state budgets stretched thin ever compete with the pace of extraction that spread illness faster than aid could cure? The exploitation of children deepened the wound. Inspectors found girls as young as 12 hauling sacks of ore heavier than their own bodies for $2 or $3 a day. At a press briefing, Traoré's voice rose in anger. A child belongs in a classroom, not a tunnel. From this year, any company found employing children will lose its license, not suspended, revoked. To match words with action, he launched a scholarship program for mining communities, promising free schooling for 5,000 children within the year. Parents applauded, but their eyes betrayed doubt. Hunger demanded wages today, not education tomorrow. Even the spiritual soil felt the strain. Sacred Mossi sites, drum houses where ancestors were honored for centuries, were bulldozed to make way for tailings and access roads. Elders wept as earth once blessed by ceremony was churned into gravel. At a rally, Traoré drew a line. Those cultural grounds would be declared heritage reserves under national protection. Our ancestors are not collateral damage, he thundered. Gold may glitter, but identity is priceless. Yet locals asked whether fences and decrees could truly hold back bulldozers when global appetite was knocking at the gates. The nation was changing, pulled between pride and peril. Graffiti began to appear on walls across Ouagadougou. This gold belongs to us, or to no one. Some saw it as despair, others as defiance. For Traoré, it was both a warning and a mandate. He told the crowd in Banfora, if gold is to curse us, then let it stay buried. But if it is to serve us, then every child, every farmer, every mother will feel its weight not in sorrow, but in dignity. Scholars and journalists began to whisper of a legacy in the making. Would Burkina Faso be remembered as the nation that finally rewrote the script of exploitation? Or would it join the long list of broken promises? The answer, many said, would define the Ibrahim Traoré legacy. Yet each reform, each decree, raised new tensions within the political sphere. Some ministers feared international isolation. Others argued the cost of nationalization was draining the treasury. But the captain held firm. Better an empty vault filled with dignity than a full one poisoned by theft. His stubbornness inspired many and alarmed others. In marketplaces, people asked whether one leader could carry such a burden without faltering. Was this the rebirth of sovereignty, or merely a pause before the old cycle of exploitation resumed? As Burkina Faso tightened its grip over its gold, the world leaned closer. In Addis Ababa, the African Union issued statements of cautious support, praising sovereignty while quietly urging dialogue with investors. ECOWAS, fractured by internal disputes, voiced concern about regional stability. Yet on the streets of Accra, Lagos, and Dakar, ordinary Africans cheered. For them, the sight of a small Sahel nation reclaiming its wealth was not merely politics, it was a symbol of dignity long denied. In Europe, the tone was sharper. Officials in Brussels warned of economic nationalism threatening foreign investment. Paris, bound historically to the region, reacted with unease. Analysts in French media reminded viewers that Niger's uranium still powered French cities, hinting at what was at stake should Burkina Faso's stance spread. London newspapers spoke of a dangerous precedent that may embolden other African nations. Across the Atlantic, Washington chose its words carefully. The State Department praised transparency while stressing the importance of stable investment climates. In corporate boardrooms, the language was less diplomatic. Executives fretted over potential losses. Legal teams drafted arbitration strategies, and lobbyists pressed their governments to intervene quietly. China, meanwhile, adopted its familiar caution. State media described Burkina Faso as a challenging partner, but acknowledged opportunities for future cooperation. Behind closed doors, Beijing calculated whether siding with sovereignty might offer long-term access under fairer, more controlled terms. Canada faced a particularly awkward spotlight. Its mining companies had long dominated African contracts, and the freezing of agreements in Burkina Faso unsettled both investors and politicians. A leaked memorandum granting a Canadian conglomerate full cost recovery before profit sharing was widely circulated as evidence of past exploitation. The freeze of such contracts became a rallying cry for those demanding a new order. International organizations, too, began to weigh in. The International Monetary Fund acknowledged the potential for tenfold GDP growth, but warned of inflationary risks and the dangers of over-centralization. The United Nations highlighted the environmental toll already visible and urged balance between extraction and preservation. Yet such warnings often felt like echoes of old patterns, global voices advising caution, while global corporations positioned themselves for advantage. For the Burkina Faso, the outside chorus only deepened the sense of siege. Each headline in Paris, Ottawa, or Washington carried the shadow of interference. Each diplomatic visit was read not as partnership, but as pressure. Yet in Ouagadougou, Traoré's speeches grew bolder. He spoke not only of surviving today, but of reshaping tomorrow. He declared that Burkina Faso's fight was not merely about contracts or gold. It was about charting a path that could endure for generations. Some began to call this vision the Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050, an Africa that refuses to export raw poverty disguised as raw materials and instead builds value, knowledge, and independence on its own soil. Could a nation so small, so encircled, truly set a precedent that would ripple across Africa? Or would the world's pressure bend it back into the old order? The road ahead for Burkina Faso glows like the horizon at dawn, bright with promise, yet heavy with clouds. On one path lies sovereignty, national refineries rising on the red earth, contracts written in plain language, profits flowing into schools, clinics, and wells. On another path looms the familiar curse, lawsuits dragging in foreign courts, sanctions strangling trade, smuggling bleeding wealth through porous borders. The choice is clear, yet the journey treacherous. Traoré has outlined a future where no raw gold leaves the soil unrefined, where 20% of all profits flow directly into community funds, and where every contract is printed in the newspapers for citizens to read. In Banfora, elders debate whether to build a clinic or a well first. In Kaya, women demand solar panels to light their homes. For once, decisions seem to rest not in distant capitals, but in the hands of villagers who till the land. Whether such councils resist corruption better than ministers remains to be seen. The captain speaks of education as armor, scholarships for engineering and geology, training programs for miners, and the dream of a new generation who understand not just how to dig wealth, but how to shape it. If successful, Burkina Faso may cease to be merely a source of raw material and become instead a crucible of knowledge. If it fails, the dependence of old will return, wearing new clothes. Yet sovereignty comes at a cost. Investors threaten lawsuits, neighboring regimes mutter about instability, and even friendly governments weigh their words carefully. The nation stands like a lone tree in the Sahel wind, its roots deep, its branches vulnerable. Will the storm strengthen it or snap it in half? For the people, the question is more immediate. Can a child breathe clean air while bulldozers carve scars into the hills? Can poisoned rivers be healed by purification plants? Can dignity be bought with decrees, or must it be earned each day in the choices leaders make? These are not questions for foreign banks, but for those whose hands carry water, whose backs bend under harvests, whose voices have too often gone unheard. And so the road stretches forward, uncertain, unpaved, but alive with possibility. The torches of supporters still flicker in Ouagadougou's squares, chanting the captain's name. Yet beyond the chants lies silence. The silence of contracts waiting to be signed, of threats whispered in embassies, of pressures that can bend even the strongest resolve. Will Burkina Faso's road lead to the harvest of sovereignty, or to another season where the soil yields only sorrow? $60 billion buried beneath the Sahel. For some, it is a figure of salvation. For others, a warning written in gold. Burkina Faso now stands where so many African nations once stood, at the edge of wealth, staring into the abyss of history. Congo's mountains of minerals became rivers of blood. Niger's uranium lit the Eiffel Tower, while its own children studied by candlelight. Angola's oil raised glass towers in Luanda, but left millions thirsty in the countryside. These are not distant tragedies. They are mirrors held before Ouagadougou today. And yet something feels different. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has declared that no contract will hide in shadows, that no raw gold will leave without value added at home, that communities will hold a direct share of the nation's wealth. These policies are not mere decrees. They are attempts to write a new story. A story that could define the Ibrahim Traoré legacy not as another failed promise, but as a turning point where dignity outweighed dependency. The vision stretches further still. Refineries on Burkina soil, scholarships shaping a new generation of engineers, councils deciding their own future, and laws that make exploitation harder than honesty. If achieved, this may well become the cornerstone of an Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050, an Africa no longer exporting poverty disguised as resources, but knowledge, strength, and pride. But questions remain. Can one nation resist the weight of Paris, Beijing, Washington, and Toronto combined? Can contracts printed in newspapers outlast pressures whispered in embassies? Can a small, landlocked state carry the torch of sovereignty long enough for others to see its light? The people of Burkina Faso know too well that history does not forgive illusions. Yet they also know that history remembers courage. If this gold is truly for them, if the reforms endure, then the Ibrahim Traoré legacy may be remembered not as a gamble, but as the first proof that Africa can break the curse. The soil has given its treasure. Now the question is whether its people can transform it into freedom. And that question belongs not only to Burkina Faso, but to all of us who watch, hope, and wonder. If you believe this story must be told until the very end, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. The buried truth has been silenced long enough. Now it is time to let it speak.